Hello everyone, welcome to Learn n8n Pragmatically. My name is Luca, I'm an AI automation engineer and n8n ambassador from Italy. Today we'll be looking at episode 2 of how to build your first AI agent. So first, let's take a look at what we already got. We got a chat trigger node that will receive our message, and we got an agent that will elaborate a response based on our message, and we also got a simple memory setup to make it sure that our agent actually remembers the conversation that we're having. Now, this agent is still pretty boring and bland. Let's fix that by giving our agent a system prompt. A system prompt is basically a way to define instructions for our agent to follow while generating the response for the user's request. So we double click on our AI agent node, and first let's give our agent a name. You move to the top left, you click on it, and I'm gonna call him Emilio. Then what we want to do is we want to add an option, and we want to add a system message. As you see in here, we got this: you are a helpful assistant. This is the only instruction that this agent has. First, I'm gonna give you a silly example just to understand how the system message actually impacts the way in which the agent responds. So you are a helpful assistant, comma, you start every sentence with "we." There we go. And so in order to test it, I'm just going to open the chat and I'm gonna write a simple message. Hello, my name is Luca. We see the agent is doing its thing, and hello Luca, nice to meet you, how can I help you today? Now, this is a silly example, but this is to signify what you can do with proper system prompts. Now, let's take it up a notch. Let's say that we want an agent that is not only able to respond to the user, but also to flag inappropriate behavior. What we want to do is we want to make sure that the system prompt contains some kind of instruction to help the agent identify behaviors of the user that may need to be flagged as negative, for example. So let's move back to system message, and I suggest you switch to this expression mode, just because you have this button here that makes it easier to work on the system prompt. And let's look at a more complete system prompt. So what I did here is I created the system prompt, which is a bit more structured, and your task is to understand the user's intent and respond accordingly, analyze the user's message and classify their intent as either positive or negative. You are a moron. There we go, we see the memory, and then we see Emilio that's saying in response, I'm here to help if something went wrong, blah blah blah, and then we got intent negative. Now, you may think that this is enough, but this is actually not exactly what we want. This is because in this case, the user will be able to see this intent parameter that was generated by the agent based on his request. We don't want that. We want the system to have a different kind of behavior based on the intent that the agent understood from the user's request. So in order to do that, we need what's called an output parser. An output parser is basically a way to force the response from an LLM and an agent to respect a given structure, and we'll look for require specific output format. We flag it, and we see that now if I zoom in on the agent, we got this output parser node that wasn't there before. So let's select structured output parser. Now, this is where we provide an example of the structure that we want to get as an output. This thing that you're seeing here is what's called a JSON, which is JavaScript object notation. It's a way to express how an object is structured. Now, what we want is we want to provide our own JSON. Even better, we can select the schema type, define using JSON schema. This is a more precise way of defining how we expect the object to come out of the agent node. Now, you may not be familiar with this kind of notation, and this is where I want to introduce you to some kind of a trick. Now, let's take a look at this. If I move back to my canvas view by closing this, you see I've got my agent and my workflow. What I can do is I can select by dragging the entire agent node, Control-C or Command-C on Mac to copy it, and now I can move into whatever AI assistant I've got, go in here and you paste it. And now you will see that the workflow is basically just a huge JSON file which contains all the information, and you see we got the system message. So now we can ask our AI assistant write me a proper JSON schema for the output parser. And ideally, our agent will provide us with a complete, there we go, JSON schema. We copy it, let's move back to n8n and let's have a look at it. So I'm just going to replace it. So what we got here is the JSON schema of the output that we want from our agent. This is the type object, and then we got properties. We see in properties we got the response and intent. If we collapse this, we can see that we also got this required property, which means what is required for the output to be considered valid is these two properties, response and intent. And in fact, response and intent. Now response is going to be of type string, and this is the reply created by the agent for the user's query. Then we got the intent, which once again is of type string, but also has this enum, so it's always going to be positive or negative. Then we also got this description. Say for example for the response property, the description is your reply to the user, and for the intent, the description is classification of the user's intent. Keep in mind that all of this, even the output parser and later the tools and the tools description, will be used by our agent to steer the generation, which means that the better we explain what we want, the better the result is going to be. Once again, I'll open the chat and now I'll say you are a moron. Once again, you see now the output parser. See, problem in Node Emilio, model output doesn't fit the required format. Now what we can do is we can open this structured output parser and we can select autofix format. If I now move back, I'll see that the output parser, let's close something, output parser has this model node underneath it that I can just click and drag and connect to the same LLM model. Basically what this means is if the output parsing fails, the agent will retry the generation. And so this is how we can make sure that we get a response in the format that we want. Let's try again. So I'll open the chat and I'll do this once again. You see there's this icon in here, repost message, so I don't have to write it all over again. And now hopefully, there we go. We got some output, and if we double click the agent, we see that the output is actually now a JSON object with the schema that we provided in the output parser. So the response, I'm here to help, blah, 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 and we got the intent field. We also see something peculiar. So the agent finished his generation, but I don't see anything in the chat. This is because now it's not very clear what the workflow should output for the user. Let's fix that. In order to do that, I'll also introduce something else, which is the pin mode for nodes. Let's say we're working on a complex workflow, or even this workflow, which is pretty simple. I don't want to regenerate the response from the agent every time, because to be fair, this response is pretty decent for what I want to do. So I'm going to pin the data. I'm also gonna pin, and this is another way in which you can do it. You can select a node, you see this gray outline, and then you hit P as pin on your keyboard. Now the node turns purple. What this does is I can now run the entire workflow by just clicking execute, and every node that is pinned will always output the data that it's pinned inside, which means we can now work on the rest of the workflow without having to repeat the elaboration of the previous node. This is very helpful when working with agent because it allows you to keep costs to a minimum, because you don't have to regenerate new tokens every time, and so your AI bill stays as low as possible. Let's move forward. Let's say that now we want to have two different behavior for our workflow based on what the user said. Let's say that the user was pretty negative. So what we want in that case is we want to give, let's say, a warning. So let's add an if node, which is a logical gate. Let's look for if. There we go. And in here, since the output from the agent is an actual object, we can select which part of the agent output we want to use. In my case, I want to check the intent. So I'll just click, drag and drop it. And let's see, intent is equal to, let's say, negative. And I'm also going to rename the if node so that it's easier. So is intent negative. In this case, let's execute the step and we see we got the true branch, which means that in this case, the agent deemed that the user intent was negative. And so you see now, we got this. We got two branches coming out, the true and the false one. In case the user's intent is negative, let's say we want to send a warning. So I'm just gonna hit plus and let's look for chat, send a message. And in here, I don't want the agent to generate a response. Maybe I just want to, say something like, you're not very kind, try again. There we go. While I can click the node and then Control D or Command D on Mac to duplicate it. There we go. And in this case, which is the false branch of is intent negative, which means that if we go in this branch, is because the user intent was positive. So in this case, what I want as a message is not you're not very kind, but it's the output from the agent. So I'll just open the agent node on the left in the input panel. I'll click on response, I'll drag and I drop it. And now let's try again. So let's execute the workflow. And we see we got a mistake. Problem in node chat, response mode in chat trigger must be set to using response node. This is because by default, let's open the chat node. By default, in the left panel where we define the properties, we see there's an additional property that we can find in add field, which is response mode. This defines how the workflow behaves. So in our case, the chat trigger is using the last node output, but what we want is we want to use response nodes. So let's select that. There we go. So let's give it a try. So in here, thanks a lot for being so helpful. And we see Emilio is doing its thing. And then we got the is intent negative, which goes into the false branch because the intent was positive. And so we got the response that was generated by the agent. But if we say, just kidding, you are a moron. There we go. Once again, you see Emilio is thinking about it. Then the intent is negative and we got, you're not very kind, try again. Keep in mind that in this case, this message was hard-coded in here, and it's not the output that we got from the agent. So this concludes this session. Next time we'll look at how we can use tools to expand what our agent can actually do. If you stick up until here, well then, thank you very much. I understand there's a lot of information, but you know you are on the right path for learning. So once again, thank you very much. If you have any question, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time on Learn n8n Pragmatically. Bye!